So if you don't know Mike, you should. He's on social. He's probably one of the top 30 agents on social, ranked. If you follow him, you'll know why. Go to his, it's Mike at Mike Sherrard on Instagram, and you'll learn how he has transformed his life and his business from prospecting to social. And we're going to spend some time right now talking about that journey and talking about the uniqueness that being from Canada offers him. And if you are a Canadian agent, this is especially for you because he's got insight into how to make things work and better. And the unique perspective that you're about to share with us, I think will help a lot of Canadian agents see things differently.
Certainly.
Because a lot of the visibility that you have wasn't there. You found it, and now you're about to share it.
Exactly. I'm ready to go.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Mike.
Of course.
All right. So let's get into a little bit more about your story. Tell us some quick successes, some big long-term goals that you've accomplished recently. Talk about your success. I think that's a great place to start, not to necessarily brag, but I think it's important to know who the people are listening to right now.
Yeah, definitely. So without going too far, just to give you kind of the Coles notes in my journey is, I used to be a mechanical engineer and left that at a time where I was actually doing very well at engineering and our economy was doing very bad. And everybody said that it would be a crazy decision to go into something like real estate when we are just embarking on a long-term recession. And I decided to do it anyway because I saw that a lot of the agents in the States were doing very innovative things. And not only was the quality a bit lacking from what I saw in my city, but also they weren't leveraging modern technology or tools like prospecting. So I decided to get into real estate anyway. I didn't have any social media platforms. I had no sales training, no experience, and decided to go all in. And since then, the first night I was licensed, I went door knocking in -5 in the dark, in the snow, picked up 2 listings, $700,000 each. Within the first few weeks, I was using the REDX, and I ended up getting 3 listings using creative for sale by owner tactics. And then from there, I started going all in on both social media and prospecting were the 2 bread and butters of my business. Through prospecting, I was able to get 50% of my listings throughout the first, second, and first year of being a realtor.
Mm-hmm.
And then some accolades was, I was ranked top 30 realtor in the world on social media, just past the first 22, which was the $500,000 listing.
Yeah.
So that was really cool in my first year of going from not even having social media to getting ranked as something as credible as that. Since then, I've had the highest sales price at my brokerage for any sold property. I've set multiple records. I was a top producer my very first year as an agent and have continued to be ever since. And it's all from blending old school, traditional, with new school, modern ways of doing business.
Yeah, you said that really well. Yeah, thank you. I have the privilege of knowing you behind the scenes here, and I think if we just tease apart a little bit of what you were saying before and how you became big on social, right? A lot of agents, whether they're Canadian or U.S., look to where you are, not to where you were.
Of
and
course.
I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make. I think we'll reverse engineer this conversation to then dial back into the Canadian market specifically. But from a high level, I think the story is a really good one to tell. I know kind of in between the lines and words what some of the things you meant. And so let me ask you this. The transition, right? You got on the phone and you started essentially doing what Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, document, don't create. And you were an unknown agent, an unknown social media person. So tell us about the first post that you made and how that first post translated into prospecting and the transition from prospecting to social success.
Yeah, there's a couple really cool things that I'm excited to touch on for those who are listening is, I didn't understand the importance of social media, but I knew that the top agents in the States that I wanted to emulate were using social media. So I was young, I was 24, I had no sphere because I just moved to a new city, I had no sales experience, no real estate experience, so I needed to find a way to get myself out there. The 2 ways that I was able to get myself out there were putting the boots on the ground with prospecting and also using a scalable method, which is social media. The very first post I made on Instagram was my headshot. And ever since then, I was continuously documenting my journey. Now, if you go back, I haven't deleted a single photo since the day I had Instagram. So you can see how terrible it was.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tie this into prospecting. The first 5 photos were me finding Google images of things like stairs with positive quotes on it, and I would Photoshop my logo into it. Or a closet that looked like it was luxurious and Photoshopping my logo onto it. My first posts were terrible, but it was just a matter of consistently posting and making that part of your journey. The more impactful posts started when I started becoming familiar with sharing behind the scenes and sharing the back end of things that people wanted to see but never knew. There was a lot of people that see agents that are doing well, and they just assume that business floods their way and that they're just effortlessly walking through life selling these $1 million properties, making a lot of money, buying nice things. That couldn't be further from the case. So what I wanted to do is break down that stigma and show people how hard we really do work. Because a lot of people see realtor commissions,
Right.
and they say, how can we validate these commissions? It's way too much money for what they do. They just put it on the MLS and sell it and get paid.
Right.
What actually happens is they don't see the behind the scenes work of how much effort it takes for us to actually get that listing. It might take 10 hours of work for us to list and sell a property. It might take 50 hours or 100 hours of work for us to do all of the back end stuff to get that property in the first place.
Especially on some of those luxury listings that you sell.
Exactly. So I wanted to give people a behind the scenes look, a raw, authentic journey as to how I was actually doing business. And the transitional period that unfolded from giving people a very authentic journey.
What were some of those authentic things that you shared?
One of the things is showing and talking to people about when I was struggling, when I was getting the phone hung up on me, when I was getting doors slammed on my face, sworn at, things like that. But not just talking in a woe is me, this is so terrible. It was talking about how you can flip that into a positive experience, how you can talk about, you can hone your sales experience, you can improve your scripts, you can use it to build character, and also sharing the wins of when you do meet great people and when you do convert and things like that. So I was giving people a very honest, transparent journey. And by people getting an opportunity to see what I was doing in real estate, they started becoming familiar with my work ethic and my hustle. And there became a tipping point in there where I was having people who didn't know me. I had one lady, and she had a $1.2 million property. She wants to buy a $3 million property. Her husband's a commercial agent who knows every realtor in the city and is friends with them. She DM'd me on Instagram saying she wants me to help them sell and buy a house, solely because they've been following my journey, watching me call and knock, and they want somebody to work that hard for them as I'm working for everybody else in my business.
So you're saying the 16,000 plus followers you have right now, when you first started, in a very short period of time ago, 2-3 years, you were essentially at zero. And just by showing and documenting the struggle, the reality, the authenticity, people started to follow you because it was a real story. I think that's probably part of it. And it sounds like it was kind of a mix of audiences.
Yeah.
So audiences such as the agent community and your local community who could both see the level of work that you were putting into it.
Certainly. And one of the cool things that not many people think about is when you're using social media, you're able to tag. So you can tag locations. So what I used to do is if I was door knocking, I would take a selfie of me with my purple card behind me with holding my flyers in the community that I was door knocking at, and I would tag that community. And since I had a lot of engagement on my post, that post would show up at the top of that community's page. So I was the first realtor anybody was seeing if they wanted to even look at what was going on in their local community. What I did with cold calling is I would tag a new community every single time I cold called. Even though I was dialing from my own house, I would tag a new community and I would write a thorough story, and that way people would see that I was engaging with the community. So every time somebody wanted to see what was going on with Auburn Bay, the first thing they would see was this realtor with a purple BMW out hustling in their community. So I started getting a lot of local awareness that way and people becoming familiarized with myself. I was even door knocking one day in a community called Auburn Bay, and I door knocked this 50-year-old woman's house.
Yeah.
And she looked down, and all of my laces on my dress shoes are purple. And she looked down and looked at my laces and said, "Do you drive a purple BMW by chance?" And I said, "Yes." She's like, "Oh my gosh, I follow you on Instagram. I can't believe you're the purple realtor, right?"
Yeah.
And I showed up at her door and I got that as a client, all because I was farming areas, and I had little design cues like my purple flare that people became familiar with, but I was documenting my prospecting. Going back to Gary Vee, document, don't create. Nobody knows the hustle you're doing if you don't share it. Right. You could be the hardest worker in the world, but if nobody knows that, you're not going to get the credibility for doing so, right? So I wanted to share that journey, similar to the fact that with movies, we all like to see the behind-the-scenes footage.
Right.
We have an opportunity to give people the behind-the-scenes of real estate.
A little bit like these guys right over here who are a little out of frame for me.
Yes.
So I think that little transition point, I'm going to try to reboot it from one of our last conversations, which was as you prospect and did the hustle, which we can get into in a little bit, the kind of psychology and mindset of prospecting and why to do it, to look at where you were, not where you are, and to look at it as a gradation, a transition, the spectrum. At what point did social start to take off for you? Could you go back and give us a little history tour of that?
Certainly, yeah. So in my first year, again, I started from zero. I had no followers. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was committed to doing something, which was more than everybody else.
Right.
Right? Because a lot of people understand the importance of having an online presence, having a personal brand, but they don't want to actually take action. Right? So I wanted to execute. And what I started doing was one post a day. And I posted one post a day for 600 days until I got 10,000 followers. And I documented that journey. And all along the way, it's one thing that I'd like to touch on with people is when I got featured on Joshua Smith's podcast, GSD Mode, as somebody who was crushing it on Instagram and door knocking, I had 1,200 followers.
Wow.
When I was ranked top 10 realtor in my city on social media after 6 months of being an agent, I had 1,600 followers. When I was ranked top 30 in the world on social media, I had just shy of 4,000 followers, yet everybody else had tens of hundreds of thousands. Now, what was the difference there?
Great question.
The difference is the fact that when they were analyzing who were the top realtors on social media, it wasn't about your following, it was about the impact you were making. And what I want people to understand is that you can make a big impact with a small audience. And you have a lot of people that make this fictitious assumption that in order to be influential on social media and make an impact or become top of mind, you need to have this grand audience of 20, 30, 50,000 followers. What I urge people to do is understand that every single follower means something. So if you've got 300 people on your following, I have people that have 300 followers and say, well, there's no point of me putting out this content until I've got thousands of followers, it's too much work. Those 300 people have shown you that they are interested in hearing what's going on in your life. Every single follower matters, and I wish people would treat it. And until you provide enough value to your small following, you will never get a big following.
That's a big takeaway.
Right? So I started treating it like every single follower that I added on a daily basis meant something to me and was genuinely interested in my journey. So I treated them like that. I speak at public schools and I speak at high schools, 26 students in the audience who I'll never get business from. I present to those students the same way as I present to 2,000 realtors when I speak. Because I think every single person in your audience, whether it be in person or behind the scenes on social media, they're equally as important to your journey. So one of the big tipping points came from when I started getting ranked by the influence I was having over people, not predicated on my following.
That's a great distinction.
Exactly. So, by the end of my first year, kind of come full circle. It was kind of around, April of 2018, because I started around, spring of 2017. That's when the tipping point really happened. People knew me, not only locally, but around the world as the door knocker in Canada. People saw my personal brand and understood. Every time they saw the color purple, they thought of me. My BMW, everybody in my city knew that purple car.
We talk about it here.
Exactly, right? So
the Canadian purple car BMW door knocker.
Yeah, so I started finding ways to brand myself that was authentic to me, and I executed on that. And it got to a tipping point where 50% of my business was coming from prospecting and 50% was coming from real estate social media aspects.
That sounds like a great balance.
It was.
Mindset. I feel like you're talking about mindset without actually calling it out right now. So I'd like to take a chance to call it out. Is the way agents look at social and likes probably could be the same way they look at contacts and appointments, right?
Easily.
So if you're like, I only have 100 followers, what's the point in doing this? If I only have one contact a day, what's the point of even trying? I'll take it one step further, is if you were to look at your bank account and say, I only have $1 in it, what's the point of putting more in, right? And so like the measurement of what you have is not as important as the actions and mindset behind what it is you're going after. So I'd like to make the transition, because I think a big part of your success is the lens that you look through, that if other people could see it, especially the Canadian audience, our Canadian customers, it could help them out tremendously.
There's one thing that I'm going to say, and this relates to both cold calling and door knocking, and I absolutely love it. And it's going to be a bit ruthless, but that's what we're here for, is to be honest and transparent. Now, 2 quotes that I like to use is, the hardest door to open is your car door. So when I'm door knocking, the first thing I tell myself is the hardest door is your car door.
Wow, I love that.
Because as soon as you open and get out of your damn car, as soon as you start knocking, you're going to get into this groove where you're out there, you're hustling, and you feel it. You feel like you're being productive. You feel like you're outworking other people, and you're going to knock for days, right? But so many people struggle just getting out of their car door. Same thing with cold calling, is people struggle to pick up that first number. But as soon as they're in there and they see the 3 lines going, and it's like a game and they become engaged, it's almost like a rush of who's going to pick up, who you're going to talk to, what's going to happen. And I became very familiar with that, and I absolutely loved it. So I would always do the 3-2-1 method, where as soon as I wanted to call, I would count down from 3, 2, 1, I would just start going. And one of the things that I like to relate it to is, I always like to draw parallels between fitness and business. I find there's a lot of different parallels. Nobody likes to go into a spin class, but you feel like $1 million after you finish. You feel productive, you feel healthy, you feel like you just outworked other people. Not so much with door knocking, but with cold calling, I got this rush where I felt like as soon as I picked up that phone, I was hating it, but as soon as I got done, not only did I feel productive, but subconsciously in my mind, I felt powerful, because I knew that I just outworked every single agent in my city for those last 2 hours. And I felt like it started my day on such a positive note, and it almost catapulted me into productivity for the rest of the day. So that feeling of confidence after going out and calling for hours made a world of a difference for my business. So I think the perspective and the mindset has a huge impact on everything that you're doing, and going in and trying to flip the script and find ways for you to not hate it and dread it, but make it give you momentum and power.
In my own personal life, and I'm not going to add too much to it, but 3, 2, 1, I've got something I say, which is do it now, do it now, do it now. And as soon as I put my feet in my shoes, which is the same thing as opening that first door, there's common psychology around the things that we resist are the things that we need to do. But as soon as we get into momentum, I think we could find, I was reading an article about Herb Keller, founder and CEO of Southwest, and their kind of motto is wheels up. Right. And so kind of a similar thing is, as long as the wheels are going up, that's the momentum that's driving the company. As soon as I'm putting my shoes on, that becomes the momentum I use to get out the door and get my win for the day, regardless of what else happens. And I'd never thought about the hardest door to open in door knocking, which is a great mnemonic, was your car door. Just get to the car door.
The first time I had an agent that was working with me try to go out and door knock, he was so excited. He was ambitious. He was pumped. He was like, I've watched all the cold calling videos. I know my script. I've watched all the door knocking videos. I'm ready to get it. And I shit you not, he called me from his car. And I was like, because he was supposed to door knock at 12.
Right.
So I texted him at 11:55, and I'm like, good luck door knocking today. He calls me at 10 after 12. I'm like, hey man, how you doing? He's like, Mike, I have to be honest, I'm petrified right now. I'm sitting here in my car, I'm shaking, I'm nervous, I have no idea what to do. And a lot of people get scared like that because in their mind, they know how to do it, but there's a huge gap between what you're thinking and actually executing, right? But the thing is once you actually execute it, it becomes a familiar part of your routine.
Right.
The same thing goes with using dialers. It's intimidating at first. You there's the ambiguity of you don't know what's going on the other line. But here's something I need your audience to understand, is when you're calling, you're going to face rejection. You're going to face light rejection. You're going to face ruthless rejection. But what you need to understand is the rejection's not a byproduct of you. You are not doing anything wrong. You also don't know what's going on in that person's life, whether it be behind the door or behind the phone. You don't know if that person just lost their job that day. You don't know if they just had a divorce that day, if someone in their family passed that day. You don't know what's going on in their life. So oftentimes we make the false assumption that they're upset because we are calling them. If we are calling them and truly doing it in a way where our script is predicated on providing value, you have to consciously understand that when you make that call, you are not doing anything wrong to that person. So if they lash out at you, that's not a reflection of you, and you cannot take that personally. And a lot of people take door knocking and cold calling rejection personally, but you need to know that it's not your fault. And if you just move on happily and say, wow, unfortunately that person must be having a bad day, thankfully I'm not in their position, and move on to the next, and not take offense to it and understand that it's not your fault, you're going to have a much better time cranking out those calls than if you start to think, wow, this is a problem with me. They're upset because I called them. If you are focused on providing value, you can consciously know that it's never your fault that they respond the way they do.
Let's get into something a little bit controversial.
Let's do it.
I know you love this. Help me understand your perspective of the psychology of the average Canadian agent, and how does that compare from your perspective to the American agent?
This is a good one, and I've voiced my opinion many times on this, and some people get offended by it, but it's the true reality. Is something I deeply admire about the States and the agents that are here, or the entrepreneurs here in general, is that the competition is ruthless. People are doing and paying for anything that can give them a leg up on their competition, because the competition is fierce down here. And they understand that if you can put $50 in, but you can get $150 out, that is worth the investment. The difference that I see frequently in Canada is the fact that they're willing to pay for the bare minimum that they need to in order to get by. So they're willing to pay for their listing to get uploaded, but they're not willing to pay oftentimes for professional photos. The ones that do, the select maybe 25% that do, are the ones that winning, and I admire them. I credit them all day long. But the large majority fall into this cycle where they're not willing to invest into products, services, or self-help. And in turn, they struggle in real estate. And because they struggle in real estate, they have no money. Because they have no money, they can't invest. And it's this vicious circle. So I noticed that, again, a lot of agents weren't prospecting. And oftentimes I asked why, and they said, rejection's part of it, but I don't want to pay for a system that I can't see a return on today, right? So I capitalized on that and started dialing, and that was one of the big, contributions to my early success. But it's unfortunate because you see agents down here that are always looking for the next thing that can give them the leg up, and they build this foundation of business. And up in Canada, it's much more relaxed. But honestly, that's a good thing, because those that are prospecting and those that are investing in their business are the ones that are winning right now, especially when we're in a tough market.
Is there a huge, vast difference between agent types? Meaning, would you say there are ultra successful agents and everybody else? And then in that category of ultra successful agents, is it this common category or characteristic that runs through them that you see they've adopted more of an American mindset? Is that, I don't want to brand or take any favorites. I'm just trying to give the audience some concepts to put on as you lay them out.
Yeah, I think there's kind of three categories actually. Is there's the top agents, and they're the ones that worked ruthlessly. They were creative. They either tapped into their own niche, or they found a way to brand themselves properly, or they just straight up hustled. There's the group in the intermediate section, and they're the ones that have the work ethic. They just haven't seen the results come to fruition yet. They will get there in time if they're consistent with what they're doing right now. They just haven't made it there yet.
Yeah.
And then you've got the ones at the bottom. And the ones at the bottom either got into the industry when it was hot, thinking it's a walk in the park. Then we get into a recession and they realize that they're hooped.
Yeah.
There's the ones that aren't willing to invest into their business. So they run through their family, friends, and sphere of influence. And then they realize that they're dry and they're not willing to go out and work. And there's the ones that just simply get into it for the lifestyle and realize that the lifestyle doesn't come without a price, right? For me, I believe it takes a 3-year cycle, a minimum 3-year cycle, in order to get to the point where a flexible lifestyle can even become entertained into your business. Those first 2 to 3 years, you have to be working with your head down, the blinders on 24/7 with no life. So I think that's kind of how I see the majority of people falling into things. But the ones that are winning are definitely winning for a reason. And I admire every single one of them. They've all found their own unique way to do it, and they're doing it very well.
Let's talk about Canadian prospecting. Let's talk about
Yes.
Canadian laws, the differences, what you now know, what they ought to know, and ways that you've been able to succeed in, let's just say, a more regulated environment.
Certainly. Yeah, so for those that don't know but are certainly tuning into this, it's actually illegal to target and solicit for sale by owners and expired listings in Canada. So for me, when I got into real estate, I was always watching agents from the States. And what are everybody talking about? They're always talking about for sale by owners and expires. They're the low-hanging fruit. That's how you're going to get your business. They're ripe for the picking. So when I first got into real estate, I said, okay, this is awesome. This is easy. I have people raising their hand saying that I either want to sell or I did want to sell and I didn't get the job done. I can do it for you. I thought it was going to be awesome. And I realized quickly that it wasn't the case in Canada. So it was illegal. Now, when I got my first listings, aside from the 2 I mentioned from door knocking, the first 3 listings I got after that were done by contacting for sale by owners. So I was using the REDX and I was dialing for sale by owners, thinking nothing of it. And I was getting listings quick because it was fantastic. They said they wanted to sell, but I knew they couldn't get the job done. They had iPhone 4 type photos. They didn't have any good description. It was a terrible representation of oftentimes a very beautiful property. What were they doing? I could do a better job. And then my broker sat down with me and he's like, how are you doing as a new agent? Like, good, I've got 5 listings. I've got 2 from door knocking, 3 from contacting for sale by owners.
Yeah.
And he said, for sale by owners? You can't do that. So after understanding that it was not so legal in Canada to target for sale by owners, I stopped that. But I started thinking of creative ways to do business. And I acknowledged the fact that expireds were also a good opportunity as well, but we can't target them. So with calling and knocking,
You can't directly target
you
them.
can't directly
I guess
target
targeting
them.
it means directly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can't directly solicit a single property if it's an expired listing. But I kind of took a step back and said, well, what if I target the entire area and just happen to stumble across that property? Because maybe I intended to stumble across it. I don't have a chance to look at all the expireds in my city. Maybe I actually did just go knock or call that whole area and stumble across them. There's no way for people to tell. So what I started looking is I started looking at the properties that were expiring in high turnover communities. And I started either calling the entire neighborhood and coming across that one person and remembering the address, or I was knocking the entire street on both sides and coming across that property. And by doing that, there was no way to say that I was directly soliciting that single individual, but also I was able to target them and get good results. So by putting a different spin on it and still adhering to our privacy laws up in Canada, while also leveraging the platforms and systems to the best of their ability, that's how I started getting really efficient and effective results with my time by doing cold prospecting.
That's great. You have some really interesting viewpoints on the weather and how it impacts Canada. We know anywhere when it gets cold, animals go into hibernation, and I think people do too. And I think that might be a psychological advantage that you've given yourself that I think is important to share with the audience on how you look at the weather and what you do and how you respond when it changes. Could you
Big
go
time.
into some of those stories?
I would love to. So there's 2 cycles of business that are the most important to capitalize on for an individual. It's November to February, and it's May to August. Those are the 2 times of year that everybody lets off the gas. They have the winter and holiday season, and they've got the summer or vacation season. Those are the 2 times of year that I triple down and go all in, because while everybody's letting off the gas, I like to double down and triple down, and that's where you see the best results. So with things like prospecting, a lot of people let up at that time of year, especially with door knocking. We can't do it at that time of year because it truly is minus 20. But cold calling is an option. So what I started doing when November hit and it started getting too cold to door knock is I picked up the dialer.
How cold is too cold?
Okay, so too cold for me, if it's minus 10 or less, I will not door knock. If it's minus 10 or above, I will door knock. And I've door knocked in the cold and the snow. I've slipped and landed on my butt on driveways. I've looked like a fool, but I will still door knock in the winter.
What are people's reception when it's freezing and you're bundled up and fog and smoke's coming out of your mouth? What do you say and what do they say? Is there kind of almost like a I would imagine there's some level of recognition, like this guy is out here. When you start talking, almost maybe a level of respect. Am I imposing that on this, or is that true?
You're pretty right, but it also depends on the demographic. And again, not to make any judgments, but just from what I've seen in the past results, is the lower tier properties, maybe the lower middle class, when they open their door and you're there in the cold, they actually get frustrated that you're letting cold weather into their property. When I door knock $1 million plus properties and I'm hustling in the winter, usually the people that own $1 million plus properties worked hard to get there. And they have a different respect for somebody out door knocking. They switch it from thinking that this guy's soliciting to this guy's hustling his butt off. And oftentimes I started door knocking the higher income properties because they have a different level of respect for you. So when I door knock them in the winter, they are mind blown thinking, wow, look at what this guy's doing above and beyond the rest. When the rest are sitting at home with their feet up watching Netflix, this guy's got the boots in the ground and weather hustling.
Let's jump into looking at how you select an area to door knock.
Definitely. So there's a couple different ways that I like to target an area. One of the ways I look, and this is one of there's the 2 sections, is targeting high turnover. Because you want to be working in communities that do have good sales volume. And if they're expiring, they're probably expiring for a reason, but if they're positioned properly, they're going to sell. So I was always looking for either an expired or a for sale by owner that was in an area with high turnover. So that's one of the
kind of
biggest
fits into
ways.
your strategy, is if you're going to pick an area to knock, then here's a good reason to choose that one.
Exactly, right? And it's also a good message that when you're cold calling them or when you're door knocking them, you're able to explain that from the statistics, your property should have sold, right? So you can explain to them when they're on the phone that, I know your property didn't sell, but looking at the statistics, you truly should have. So let's dive into why that is. What didn't get your job done the last time you made an effort to do so? The other communities that I like to call and door knock are communities that have great sales success, but very low list volume. So these are the more coveted communities that people like to pass properties down to their children and grandchildren. These are ones with top schools, top recreational facilities, and a great lifestyle. Usually in the more mature areas that are developed, great yards, good space. Those are fantastic ones because your conversion is going to be a lot lower, but you are almost guaranteed a sale when you do get one. So those are kind of the 2 blend, is almost in contrast directly. High turnover, high volume, low turnover, but great sales success.
Let's talk about the actions and expectations from each one of those. So actions on the higher volume, it seems kind of more mainstream. I think people get it. Follow up, door knock, call, have some sort of system that keeps you in front of them, which we'll get to in a little bit about your social system. But then tell me about the mindset that someone would need to have, we'll call it the patience, to align their patience and expectations on something that is, if it's generational, I mean, almost by default, it sounds like maybe it won't ever go for sale. And so
Yeah.
how do you stay in front of and reconcile the energy and expense that goes into staying top of mind or in front of those larger, low volume, high, whatever you called it, opportunities?
Definitely. So this is, one thing that I'd like to people to understand, especially with dialing, is it's a game of patience, persistence, and consistency, in the sense that a lot of people make one call, and then if they don't get the answer they're looking for, they're done. It's the same as seeing one bus bench and never seeing it again. Do you think you're going to recollect that agent and call them up out of nowhere? It's not going to happen. By having multiple conversations with ISAs or inside sales agents, we've confirmed that the average conversion happens after the 7th or 8th touch point. So if you stop after 6, chances are if one other agent gets in front of them that very next time, they're going to go with that other agent. And people make the pitfall of stopping because they think that there's no hope, right? So one of the things, again, is creating multiple unique touch points and not just always calling, right? So these are communities, the high turnover ones, that I like to do business in. So most people are just going to call 7 times. Well, I wouldn't do that. I would call multiple times. I would call either if there was a new local event happening in the community or in our city and invite them to that event. I would call just to get in touch with them. One of the things I would do is call oftentimes if there was an extraordinary sale in that area. If a property in their community just sold in 2 days for 99% of list price, I would call them and say, hey, Joe, just want to let you know that this property down the street from you sold for 99% of list price in 2 days, and it's almost the same as yours. Would you like to know how that would impact the price of your home? And that's important for people to know. I'm not calling them saying, do you think this is now a good time to list? I'm providing value. I'm saying, do you want to know how that might impact the value of your property? And oftentimes it's a yes, because there's no obligation to just knowing the value. You don't have to list with me, but it might impact your property in a way that might get the wheels turning. Okay, so I would provide value when anything of value would come up. And then another thing that I absolutely love to do is blending it with door knocking. So I would have my contacts that I knew exactly where they live from calling. And then if I just happened to be in the area, which was never, but I would intentionally go there,
Right.
I would just show up in the evening and say, hey, I was in the area. I've been thinking about you. I just wanted to stop by, see how you're doing, see how your family's doing. Try and pick up on some cues when I was at the door. If in Alberta, we've got big trucks. If they're a truck guy, I would jot down a little note so that when I call them next, I can bring something up about trucks. If they've got kids hanging off them when they open the door, I write that down.
Yeah.
So it was a way for me to build up my intent behind calls with them and build up a way to build a deeper level connection. A bit different with the communities where people aren't going to live. But almost the same, but in the sense that you have to understand that it's a long game. It's a very
These
long
are the low
game.
turnover areas.
Low turnover areas. And these are people that, the only time that they're going to move is if they retire into assisted living or if there's a drastic change in their life or their kids. So we got to the point where that was simply just a numbers game and a game of you having to commit to the longevity of that client. Because there's people that actively farm those areas. To get into those areas is extraordinarily difficult. But again, if you find...
But when they list, they sell because they're hot.
Exactly. So what I tried to do is, I knew that every agent was just giving them a stupid market update. Well, what actually do they care about? They care about what's going on new in their community. They care about what's going on with the schools. So if I was going to go do an interview with the principals of that schools, I'd send that to them. If there was an event going on in the city or at our brokerage, I'd invite them to that. And I would just try and do little touch points that were maybe a step aside from what everybody else was doing that would help make sure that I was standing out. And that was something, but you need to understand that that might not happen for months, for years. But when it does happen, you're getting paid.
You gave me an idea. Let's do a little challenge here between the two of us. I think for the audience listening, the key differentiator is, well, value, right? If you're on the phone always asking for solicitations, one, you're an annoyance at best.
Yes.
At worst, if in Canada, you're actually breaking the law in some types of lead types. And so because we'll categorize essentially privacy laws in Canada as non-solicitation rules, regulations, policies, laws, the way around that sounds like, again, coming back to value. And it sounds like based on your observations of how the US and social media and podcasts and people that you watched and listened to and have adopted and incorporated into the Canadian market, there's a list of things that you can offer for value. So why don't we take a couple of minutes right now and maybe bullet point out some ideas for those who are in Canada on things that they can offer and say. Like I was mentioning yesterday, I started to realize the quality of my life or my business is not based on the number of invitations I receive yet, and you kind of just on that same day helped me realize it's the number of invitations that you make. And whether people accept them or not, you're putting it out there, and an invitation essentially is a form of value. I'm invited to something. If it's not a value, then why would you be inviting me to it? So market reports, those are kind of the standard. I think that's a great thing. Just listed, just sold calls are essentially the vocal version of a market report, which are great. But I know you do some really special, different things. And so let's see if we can kind of come up with a list of those right now of value offers, invitations, things that you do to stay in front of those people so you're not breaking the law and at the same time building rapport.
You know, I'll tell you a quick story about one of the biggest ways I was absolutely able to extraordinarily increase the results of getting client information from calling and knocking. Was there was a community that I wanted to do work in, and I was going to have a barbecue there in the summer. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I started cold calling the area and door knocking the area, and I was simply just inviting them to this barbecue. Mm-hmm. And I would say, you know, there's going to be free hot dogs, stuff for the kids to do. We're going to have some games. It's going to be really fun. And by doing so, I would get their name, phone number, and email by inviting them to something that had nothing to do with real estate, but it was just a matter of I want you to be there. Now, the interesting thing is some people would say, well, you know what, I'm not interested right now, but I'll wait for your mailer. I'd say, well, you know what, I care about the environment. I'm paperless. I actually don't do a mailer, but I'll gladly send you an email, and I'll let you know. It won't have anything to do with real estate, but I will send you an email, and I'll let you know. And what I started doing is I just started accumulating emails that way by inviting them to something that had nothing to do with real estate, but would be of interest to them and their kids. Because we know the two emotional strings that pull on one's heart are kids and pets. Yeah. So if you're able to do anything that relates to kids or pets, I know agents in my city that do really well by having dog events at the local off-the-leash parks.
Dog meetups.
Exactly, but it works wonders. So a couple different things that provide a lot of value is something free of charge to the community. So again, things like barbecues or local wine and cheese nights we have as well with charcuterie and a local sommelier will come and do a little something. But little seasonal events are again something that we like to do. So providing value to a community is very strong. Another thing, our business highlights go over very well because oftentimes people are very patriotic to their city and their community. And they also usually have very close ties to specific restaurants, cafes, businesses, owners of things that are in those areas. So again, like we're doing, if you're able to give a behind the scenes glimpse as to their story, what makes their stuff so delicious? Why did they come up with this vision? Why did they choose this community? What do they think of the people and their customers? If we're able to give them a business highlight like that, that's something that they'll watch. And they'll show that you're actively investing back into the individuals that make this community that they live in special. So business highlights. You know, a couple other ones are places of interest in the city. You know, something that was really neat that we like to do, and we didn't record it this year, but we probably will in the coming years, is Calgary Stampede is one of the biggest things in Calgary. Also, one thing that's really neat.
You want to give people an idea of what that is if you're not from Calgary?
So Calgary Stampede is where for 10 days the first week of July, where the city basically shuts down, and it's called the greatest outdoor show in the world. It's basically a 10-day rodeo where the biggest music artists in the world that are not country come, have performances. You've got daily rodeos, you've got big shows, things like that. The Calgary Tower is basically like the CN Tower, a big tower that lights up every night, really cool colors. Nobody knows why the colors change every night or why they choose specific colors. Similarly, nobody knows what goes on behind the scenes of the Calgary Stampede. They just see the final production. Those are things locally that are of interest. So simply just go find a way into those people and record a video of why things actually happen the way they do in your city, why they are the way they are. Why did this local artifact come to fruition? What is the significance of this local park in your city? What's the significance of the mountain or this music festival that's at Sundance? Why is that there? And what does it mean to the people or the people that are even involved in bringing it together? So anything that has local ties, and this is a double-edged sword for one great reason.
Okay.
Not only do locals care about it, but people that are visitors are interested in it. So when you're using YouTube and social media in order to share that video and you're tagging it, it's got extraordinary SEO power because it's not only being searched by local people, but it's being searched by tourists and visitors. And that way you're actually able to get in front of potential homeowners that are moving to Calgary or interested in Calgary. And you're also able to get into the local area.
Sounds like what summarized for me on that was, from a value standpoint, give people a reason to pay attention to you.
Of course.
And are there some examples on your social media page that if people were to scroll through, you could have them go look at or check at or Google right now?
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest things was I'm big into cocktails. I love the underground cocktail culture in any city. I love trying unique things. And something I love is a speakeasy. So something that's maybe a bit hidden but has a neat culture to it. So two-ish years ago, one of my friends opened up a speakeasy, now friend, and you have to go down this set of stairs behind a commercial building with no signage, and you go down and you see a bookshelf and a 1950s phone. And you have to pick up the phone, say the password. If you get the password right, the bookshelf opens, you go into the bar, and it's all 1950s decor. Very cool. They've got jazz nights. They've got all burlesque nights. Really cool. So what I did is I realized that, it just opened. This is going to catch on. This is going to be big in a city that's always looking for the next cool thing.
Right.
So I recorded a video with the owner of their master cocktail barista making my favorite cocktail and showing him doing tricks, flipping bottles, doing all kinds of stuff. I posted that video. And then I sat down with Blaine, the owner, and I said, why did you come up with this? And his story was basically that he was a garbage man that one day dreamed, after going to Chicago and San Francisco and going to New York and seeing these speakeasies, he said, one day I'm going to have my own speakeasy. And 2 years was that day. And by hearing his story, now that video has almost thousands of local views because I was the only one to create a video with Betty Lou's Library in Calgary, and that's how they found it. So that's a great example of what you can do.
My mind previously was on trying to address this for the audience listening, which is, you're mentioning charcuterie and all these things, and we started to actually get into, my question was, how do we offer things that they can do for free? And it doesn't seem like that costs that much money to do, and the local events, giving people a reason to pay attention to it almost sounds like this is I think I figured out the beauty of what you've done. So I'm about to kind of drop it here, so let me know if there's anything to add to it or you want me to delete from this because it's so top secret. Just joking. So it sounds like cold calling is that first line of defense, first line of offense. That's how you get your business. That's how you get out there. That's how you know how to connect. You got to really build your internal ability to be someone who's able to contact and connect with people. If you don't have that skill, it doesn't matter how good your social media is, there is not really the connection to real estate. I mean, real estate is a person-to-person business. Social media seems like it's one but large way to attract an audience or hold an audience or add people to your audience while you still search for the business in today's time. So a way for the Canadian agents listening to this, trying to process this for them, is how do you stay legal? How do you keep it free, right? And how do you sound like you're coming from a place of value all the time? And so if you're out there and you're finding great restaurants, chefs, grand openings, things that you like, that the people you want to work with will also like, right? You're kind of doing that mirroring effect. Like if people like cars in your case, and you're out there at the, the show for shows, and you're doing all the videos, and people in your marketplace are also interested in cars, right? You're going to attract that audience. Meanwhile, your feed also has things about updates, and you're starting to build a segment of an audience who are following you. So that way, when, let's just say you knew a neighborhood was full of people who had fast cars, which, that'd be wonderful to know that's the demographic.
It does happen.
And it does happen. So then you then make a call to each one of those houses and say, hey, I'm going to the show. Would you like to come with me? I'm looking at this thing. Or if you can't go, I'm going to make some videos. Can I invite you to the page to follow and like it? So you always have a reason of value to tie back to it. And so whatever the segment or thing that you're interested in, or representing the community, whatever they're interested in, like you said, babies and pets and foods and family, which is probably a good niche to always go after, find those things, and then that gives you a reason to pick up the phone and be relevant, of value, and legal.
Yeah, and something that every single agent needs to understand is that you need to use social media as a tool and not a toy. And a lot of people use it as a toy, and they're just using it very nonchalant manner, scrolling through it and kind of posting, average kind of stuff. But you need to realize this is a tool. This is a business tool, right? And a lot of people aren't using it intentionally, and that's why they're not getting results from it. Mm-hmm. And also something people need to understand with social media is they can't turn it into a Homes and Land magazine, which most do.
Right.
They just post photos. If you're going to have an open house, post a photo of the house with you in the shot. You need to build a face to the name, because nobody in the history of life is going to look at a picture of a property and say, regardless of the person behind that listing, I want to work with them.
Right.
They could be somebody that they has completely different moral values. They could, intimidate. There's so many things that they could dislike about the person listing that property. But if you are sharing your self and your true personality, that's who they're going to resonate with. So I like to use the 80-20 rule, where 80% of my photos have me in it. The other 20 can be just real estate. Social media is a tool, not a toy. And if that's the case, and we understand the fact that it takes time to get an ROI from social media, and it's a long-term game, everybody needs to understand and drill into their head that the way to build a rigid foundation in real estate is prospecting. And that's the only way to do it as a brand new agent. And people need to understand that people are going to gravitate towards what's easy and what's fun. What's easy and what's fun is scrolling through and posting something and seeing how many likes you got. Oftentimes people are going to have that take precedent over prospecting hours, because their intuition makes them feel like they're being productive, but they're not. As an agent, until you get to that tipping point we talked about, your primary focus has to be on income producing activities, and that solely comes primarily from door knocking and cold calling.
That's great. Well, I think you just did a great job on bringing this thing to a wrap. I don't know. I couldn't think of a better way except through maybe like telepathic abilities, which I don't have. Do you? No, okay, because you might have been reading my mind. But whatever it was, I think that was a beautiful wrap on kind of bringing things from the beginning. The high level of success that you're seeing right now, 16,000 plus followers on Instagram, one of the world's top real estate agents on social. From where you began was where we ended. Where you began is where we've ended, where you've built your business, call after call, knock after knock, discipline after discipline, from the point where you start to document, not create, and now here you are today with an understanding of how to generate an audience, hold their attention, do things legally, and offer value in a way that takes you from prospecting to social media dominance in your market.
Exactly.
All right, man. Hey, thanks so much for coming in and doing this with us. And
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Got a lot more fun things coming up next time. Everyone, let's thank Mark Sherrard for all the information he's dropped. If there's a way they want to reach out to you, connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, guys, feel free to follow me. Instagram is Mike_Sherrard. YouTube is, if you Google my name, Mike Sherrard, you'll find me. I have a lot of care to give back to people, because as we talked multiple times, I really do want to elevate the quality of the average agent in this industry. So if you do reach out to me, I can promise you I will respond. If you want to jump on a call, I'm more than happy to do so. We're in this together. You guys have helped me build the foundation of my business, so it's only fair for me to give back to you for engaging with this content.
Thanks, Mike. We'll see you next time. I'm Justin Zimmerman here at the REDX. That's it for now.